This week, alongside Starfield, AMD released two new graphics cards, the AMD RX 7700 XT and the RX 7800 XT. No video from me on those because, well, we're still knee deep in Starfield. So, the concept of a graphics card launch that tied in with Starfield is great for AMD's promotional purposes, but unfortunately not for us when our workload is so high. I can talk about the two products though. Let's just take a quick look at some benchmarks. I mean, the 7800 XT is positioned against the RTX 4070, which is about $600. And the 7800 XT is 500. And then we've got an amusing anecdote, which we might share about that shortly. But let's take a quick look at some benchmarks to show what the 7800 XT is doing. So ray tracing performance, Dying Light 2, 4070 is 14% ahead. So the 4070, we'd expect ray tracing performance to be better, right? Because Nvidia dedicates more hardware to it effectively. 14% ahead though, with the 7800 XT being $100 cheaper. Food for thought, right? Cyberpunk. Now, this is a game that is heavily optimized with the aid of Nvidia engineers. And it's 40% ahead of AMD on Ultra RT there. And obviously, it's going to be a completely different story with path tracing with the RT overdrive option. It's going to be a different league there. So the 4070 has a commanding lead in Cyberpunk. But going back to Remedy's Control, 4070 is only 15% ahead. So, it's there or thereabouts, right, on a lot of RT titles, which has been traditionally the weakness. Mm-hmm. Again, looking at those benchmarks, you'll have noticed that the 6800 XT, the last gen equivalent, is slower, but I'm finding that the new card is only about 10 to 15% faster, can be lower in some scenarios as well. So it's not a huge gen-on-gen leap, but compared to what Nvidia is doing, it's food for thought. Now, when we move into rasterization, which is AMD's strong suit, right? Hitman 3, which is strongly AMD optimized, you might say, 20% faster than the 4070, 20% faster than the 6800 XT. Plague Tale Requiem, 12% faster than the 4070, 10% faster than the 6800 XT. Forza Horizon 5, it's only 7% faster than the 4070, 4% faster than the 6800 XT. So, yes, there or thereabouts, basically. So that's the lie of the land there, but you get more memory. You get a price cut. Really, really interesting. I mean, I see this as AMD throwing the kitchen sink at Nvidia with this particular launch. They've really pushed things there. I guess the anecdote, John,
what was it?
Do you want to tell the story?
Oh, the price thing?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. At Gamescom, we met it with AMD. They were, talking about the product, and we're like, yeah, the Nvidia equivalent is, it's $599, right? Mm-hmm. It's like we're trying to come in at a lower price. So what do you guys think? What would you guess would be the price for the 7800? And we kind of looked at each other in this like, I'm not sure. And then I just was like, $499. It seems like a good price. And he just kind of retorts like, $399 would be a good price too.
Yeah, $299, I think is what he actually said.
Yeah, $399. So I think they were expecting us to say like $549 or thereabouts or something like that. But it turned out that my $499 guess was exactly what they launched at, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is basically the best possible thing they could have done.
It's a good target, right? Like I agree. That's why I actually picked that number. I was like, well, that's significantly lower than the Nvidia's offering for what seems like a pretty decent card. So it is a good price point. I just don't think they expected us to guess that.
I don't know whether they'd actually settled on the price because at that point
right.
It was still a couple of days off, and there is still this weird price disparity between the 7700 XT and the 7800. So 7800 499, 7700 449, $50 difference. But you're getting much more for your money by paying the extra $50 to the point where it's almost as if almost as if they don't want you to buy the 7700 XT, which only has 12 gigs of memory and has a significant performance shortfall, which is not commensurate with the drop in price there. So the 7800 XT, I mean, both of these products are good, right? But the 7800 XT actually really will make users think about whether they want to buy the 4070 or not, which I think is the ideal scenario for AMD, who don't have market leadership in, I don't think, practically any sector.
I feel comfortable recommending this card to people looking for a GPU in this price range, right? Like it's a pretty good value in a way that we haven't been seeing too much of that lately. I feel with every generation of cards, it feels like they're priced just a little bit out of where you'd want. And actually talking to real people building these PCs, it's clear that they are pricing a certain subset of people out of the market. Although, as we'll see with one of the questions, I guess here there is still a lot of people are still buying these expensive cards, but still, the 7800 XT seems like a great card.
Any thoughts on this one, Oliver?
I mean, I love the names, which remind me of the 7700 and 7800 series GCN cards, which are really great, especially the Pitcairn 7850 and 7870.
Those are Pitcairn.
Yeah, I had a 7870 back in the day, and that was a great card.
Absolutely.
Just looking at the performance across the board seems very strong, especially in the rasterized titles, and in titles with lighter ray tracing, it seems also very good, especially given the price disparity between this and the 4070. But I don't know. There's part of me that says, well, at this level of capability, when you look at what Nvidia is offering in the future, not for maybe titles that are out right now, but for titles that might be updated in a few months, when you look at something like DLSS 3.5, that looks awfully tempting. So that's just especially at this price point, when you're talking about a card that could conceivably be competing with an Nvidia card that could offer a path tracing experience in some future title, that's a hard thing to kind of navigate around, and it's really going to come up to individual users to decide what their emphasis is there, right?
Yeah, this is really tricky. Actually, I'm going to go to this supporter question from Fish. Hi, DF crew, exclamation point. As we tumble onwards into the era where image reconstruction is functionally mandatory for high-fidelity games, how can we really talk about graphics cards? The reviews for the 7800 XT stand out to me as odd, where reviewers compare like-for-like via FSR2 to Nvidia cards, giving a simple caveat that DLSS is an option for Nvidia users. Some compare FSR2 to DLSS, but the quality difference is not apparent in lossy, non-VSync side-by-side benchmarks. I think the impact of these features to the end user is dramatically understated by many current hardware reviewers who are not taking the time to examine image quality closely, or at least not presenting that analysis to viewers. It seems that there is a large quality gap between AI solutions and algorithmic solutions that is not really being communicated. How can consumers properly understand the value add of improved deep learning reconstruction? How can reviewers help? Can you put a dollar value on the improved quality of DLSS over FSR2 at a given resolution, or compare cards at quote-unquote equivalent image quality as best as one can? Curious to hear your thoughts, and I do understand this is a very thorny problem for the press on the whole, and he's exactly right, okay? Because yes, DLSS2, I mean, is a game-changing technology in terms of its impact on the sort of PC space in the last 3 years, especially. This is basically what I think is one of AMD's biggest problems, right? Which is if a user is upgrading from a Turing card, like 20 series, they're going to have had a lot of experience with DLSS2. They're really going to like it. They're going to have had the opportunity to test FSR2 as well. So, are they going to want to basically remove themselves from that ecosystem by going AMD? That's a really, really challenging question to answer, because DLSS is a game-changing technology. It wasn't to begin with. It had teething issues. DLSS 1 had some problems, right? But DLSS 2 has been great from the get-go and is just getting better and better. Then we've had frame gen. Now we've got ray reconstruction. Basically all of these value-added features are piling on to the point where they are becoming important. When Phantom Liberty comes out this year, it's going to be the 4070 that's going to be doing path trace visuals with high performance. Considering what what resolution you choose, of course. Alan Wake 2, that's going to be. I mean, we saw that at Gamescom. It looked incredible. Again, path tracing, frame generation, ray reconstruction. It's really tricky, and I think what Fish is actually pointing out here is actually an interesting point, because the whole concept of a hardware review relies on treating things as being entirely like for like. It's how you generate your bar charts, right? By basically normalizing everything to a set standard that every card can do. But it's clear that the Nvidia cards, they've invested heavily in the past 5 years on these features, and they are now, seriously worth considering. Tricky one, right, John?
Yeah, this actually kind of takes me back to the old 3DFX Voodoo days, when you would try to compare cards back then, because they had advantages with Glide. And you could compare numbers and see, oh yeah, these cards are competitive performance-wise, but in terms of what you actually saw on the screen, the image quality, the way things were displayed, 3DFX had an advantage there for a while that you couldn't communicate through a bar chart. And we're definitely back in that area again, where it's like, it almost doesn't make sense. Like if you do Nvidia versus AMD, not ATI, AMD in a bar chart, and you're both using FSR2, for instance, to keep things like for like, it doesn't really make sense in the real world, because you probably wouldn't be using FSR2 given that DLSS is an option, right? And I think fundamentally that, like you say, AMD's current weakness is they need to find features that are actually very compelling, that make people say, oh yeah, I want to get an AMD card because I like what they're doing with this. Like, this is a very useful, great looking feature. And, they just don't have that right now. They basically have catch-up solutions to kind of match what Nvidia is doing, but not quite. And none of their solutions are quite as good. And that's kind of where we're at the moment. And I'm a little bit surprised that we keep mentioning Starfield lacking, upcoming support for FSR3. And I'm just baffled by this, because you have all these other big games like the Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty, you have Alan Wake 2 and others that are all supporting these high-end NVIDIA specific features. Although, ray tracing will work on non-NVIDIA cards, of course, I believe. FSR 3, like Starfield, would have been the big game equivalent in AMD's arsenal to really showcase a new feature for their card. So why isn't it there? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And it just kind of highlights where they're at with sort of missing these marketing beats and really showcasing why their cards are worth picking up over the competition.
Really tricky to do to basically benchmark according to image quality, because they're two entirely different ways of upscaling, and obviously one has proven quality advantages over the others in an overwhelming range of titles, right?
And the problem there, Rich, is that this is stuff that's only really apparent in motion, right? Like, if you look at a still shot of FSR2 versus DLSS, I actually think they're pretty comparable and often look great. But it's once you begin to move the camera and actually play the game, that's when the weaknesses of FSR2 stand out. That's something we noticed hugely in Neon within Starfield, where the FSR2 implementation just starts to break down versus, the DLSS mods. And that's the kind of stuff that needs to be talked about. And that's the kind of stuff you can't do easily with the classic method of benchmarking PC graphics cards. It just doesn't fit in any longer.
I think it's really tricky. It's a really tricky situation. I'm in the privileged position of not reviewing graphics cards for Digital Foundry, which I'm very thankful for. But I guess my own personal 2 cents for what it's worth. I mean,
What about Jay's 2 cents?
Jay's 2 cents, yeah. I think that, like, obviously benchmarking needs to be a part of graphics card reviews on some level, an important part. But I also kind of think the subjective experience matters an enormous amount, because if you're getting a better experience with DLSS, if you're able to target, lower internal resolutions, if you have frame generation built into all these games, if you have ray reconstruction giving you dramatically better image quality in ray trace titles, that needs to be communicated to the viewer in a really explicit way. And I almost think it might be a little bit more like reviewing consoles after a point, where we're not just benchmarking, the console versus another console. You're talking about the OS. You're talking about all these features, in the same way that you're talking about how does the Nvidia control panel look and what cool features do I get with this card. Sort of like, the old days of 3D graphics rendering on PC. It's a little bit more like that than just traditional bar charts. What gives more FPS per dollar, right?
Actually, that's one area where AMD has a huge advantage. Their control panel layout and design. Nvidia's is ancient and horrible and slow. Yeah. It feels like it's from Windows XP. Like I don't understand why they haven't addressed that, because it's awful.
That's true.
Actually, I think what we really need for PC benchmarking this time is the equivalent of the introduction of frame time. Because if you remember, Rich, back before frame time was introduced as a concept, you would see benchmarks for anything from SLI cards to just any other random GPUs. And frame time consistency was not something talked about. It was just about how fast can it go. And I remember buying a 5870 card, which I think it was still ATI when I got it, or I can't remember. It was around the transition of ATI AMD. But that card was very powerful and it did a lot of great things, but it actually had a lot of issues with frame time consistencies in games. And I struggled with this a lot at the time, but there was no knowledge of what that was. People just called it micro stutter. And it was especially bad in SLI setups, right? Again, it was just, there's micro stutter, but there was no way to quantify that in a graph. And then the frame time concept it was introduced to the world of PC benchmarks. And it's been absolutely critical to understanding what's happening per frame. We need something like that again for these new technologies that have arisen in the PC benchmarking
for image
world.
quality.
For image quality. Like, exactly how?
Yeah.
But there's got to be some way, right? Like something maybe. But we need an equivalent.
Impossibly subjective. Right?
Maybe this is where we could leverage AI. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, the sort of Nvidia AMD divide there is real, right? And it's interesting to note that when Intel entered the market, they made the very firm decision that they needed to have an AI-based upscaler from day one. So they made XeSS, which again is, in many scenarios, qualitatively superior to FSR2 for the same reasons that NVIDIA DLSS is.
Yep.
And, they went in hard on ray tracing because they knew it's the future of graphics technology. And, those are a couple of the sort of triumphs, I would say, of the ARC products, which is that they were forward-looking in a way that AMD isn't, and they were looking at NVIDIA as the market leaders and basically the guy setting the agenda and saying, right, we've actually got to match those guys on features. That's quite interesting. But let's take this question from Rich, which isn't me, by the way. According to the Steam hardware survey, more than 1 in 20 gamers has an RTX 40 series card already, ranging from the supposedly overpriced 4080 and 4090 to the supposedly poor value 4070 Ti and lower, including the recently released and much maligned 4060. By my count, that's over 10 million units sold. I think this data smashes a lot of popular narratives on social media commentary about these products' alleged poor value relative to other options for PC gamers. I mean, I get what you're kind of saying here. The issue is that the value proposition is obviously, in many cases, being compared to the prior generation Nvidia cards, right? Which, and it doesn't look great. The 4060 Ti launching with performance scenarios where it can be weaker than the 3060 Ti, it's a red flag.
It's not a good look.
It's not a good product. The 4060, I think, is actually pretty decent, bearing in mind its $299 price point. But the concept of going out with a 33% haircut on VRAM at a time where VRAM is actually becoming more and more important, it's a bad call, right? The concept that people are buying them, could be down to any number of reasons. Part of it will be the fact that Nvidia is on the cutting edge with graphics features. They are pushing boundaries in rendering. It's fantastic to see, right? But at the same time, I don't think you can deny that some of the pricing has been problematic. 4080, for example, and the 4060 Ti, those are the kind of products that stand out to me. Regardless of whether they're sold or not, they are poor value.
The alleged poor value.
Yes. Sorry, you just reminded me of that of that comment that I put in the Slack channel based on your Starfield review. Was it like betrayal?
Betrayal, where it was like BETRAIL or something?
Yeah, betrayal.
Betrayal. I have betrayed us.
Well, I agree with my counterpart, Rich, is that, basically the social media commentary and the attitudes towards Nvidia there are clearly at odds with reality, where people are still buying Nvidia cards, right? Rightly or wrongly. That's the bottom line. It is a sort of skewed sort of outlook there. What I will say, which is kind of interesting, is that Nvidia dropped prices on the 4060 Ti. So the 16 gig model is now $430, which it's a push in the right direction, but that still should have been the 399 product from day one, and there shouldn't have been an 8 gig 4060 Ti at all, in my opinion. So there is some movement on Nvidia prices there, but they're sticking firm seemingly at $599 with the 4070. And I'm presuming they're doing that because regardless of the fact that AMD has delivered a great product with the 7800 XT, their calculus obviously is that it's not going to sell as well as the 4070, so why drop the price? Harsh but true, I guess, is the outlook there. It would be great to see prices lowered. Maybe we'll get there in due course. But in the meantime, AMD has come in with two products, one which is kind of weird and one which is actually going to cause people to sort of scratch their heads and think, should I get that 4070? Which I think is AMD's best case scenario, right? They're going to shift some units on that, I think.